With close to a 2-hour boat ride ahead of us, we decided to get an early start, meeting at the boat a few minutes before 4. The plan was to fish a few miles north of the Stannard Rock lighthouse. This meant nearly a 50-mile run out into the only recently thawed waters of Lake Superior.
Just got out to Stannard Rock, made the 45-mile run from Marquette, and going to get set up here. We're about 4 miles up north of the light. We're going to set up here in about 80 to 100 feet of water and drop some jigs. Hope the fish are biting good today.
The water was calm, there were fish on the graph, and the sunrise was truly breathtaking. As we prepared to start fishing, you could see the anticipation of what the day might bring beginning to build, and it didn't take long at all for the action to start on this true fishing gem that has a lot more to it than the name indicates.
Stannard Rock, a lot of people think it's just kind of a one rock or one real small area, but in reality it's actually a reef. It's actually an underwater mountain is what it is. It's about 1 mile to 1.5 miles wide by about 5 miles long north to south. So it's quite a big area. Most of the Stannard Rock reef is surrounded by between 500 to 700 feet of water. The average depth up on top of the reef is usually right around 200 to 250 feet of water. And then on top of that, you have a lot of structure and a lot of different pinnacles that come up, very, very sharp drop-offs and steep points that the fish will hang on. And typically those can come up anywhere all the way to 30 to 40 feet below the surface of the water. So you can be fishing in 30 feet of water and be less than a half a mile from 600 feet of water. That's part of what makes it so great out there, is those fish can live in that big, deep expanse that's out near the reef, and then they move up onto the reef to feed onto the bait fish and everything that's up there. The reef itself is made up of nothing but crevices and points, and it's a perfect place for bait fish to hide, which in turn also draws in the predator fish. It's a perfect spot for them to feed. They can move into the shallow water, they can feed on the bugs and the bait fish, and then within 1/4 mile they can drop back down, get into that 500, 600 feet of water, into that nice cold water. So it's a really special place. There's nothing else like it. There's nowhere else like it in Lake Superior where you can find fish so concentrated on certain pieces of structure. It's definitely a special place.
On board today, along with John and myself, was John's wife Jamie and friends Brad, Blake, and Jeff. Early on, Jamie was stealing the show, boating our first several fish.
The ladies' touch. I think that's it. Only woman on board and the most fish so far, so.
Jamie was off to a hot start, but eventually the guys joined in on the action too. Today we were using 2 primary methods of fishing, jigging and casting spoons. The ability to do this so far offshore is part of what makes Stannard Rock so special.
There's a couple of methods to catching fish out there. Trolling is definitely one of them. We don't do a ton of trolling, but it's definitely very productive out there. You have to be very careful with the bottom structure and things like that, because it comes up and down pretty quick, and you have to be very careful or you can lose some gear pretty quick. But what we prefer to do out there, and the big reason that we like to go out there, is because it's one of the only places in Lake Superior that you can get these fish concentrated enough to be able to get them on light tackle, whether it be jigs or casting spoons. That's the method that we prefer. We prefer to fish the very steep ridges and banks out there and the very steep structure. We rarely fish flat bottom. We're almost always fishing very steep structure, and we're casting spoons anywhere from 1/2 ounce to 1.5 ounce, letting those sink a little ways and bringing them in, or we're using jigs anywhere from 1 ounce to 4 ounces and bouncing those off the bottom. And we kind of go both ways depending on what the fish want to do. Some days the fish are suspended and they want spoons and they want things up in the water column, and many other days, like today, the fish are usually in that bottom 15 to 20 feet where typically jigs are going to work better. There's nowhere else in the lake that fish concentrate on structure like they do out there. There's other places you can jig, but the success rates would be nowhere near what you can find at Stannard Rock, because the population of fish out there on certain places is just incredible.
Today we're drifting a little fast. There's a little bit of a breeze coming out of the northwest, so we're using anywhere from 2 to 3 ounce jigs. So you look at, typical walleye gear using ½ ounce or less. A lot of times, we're quite a bit larger than that. Depth-wise, we're anywhere from, I think we're 60 feet down right now. We'll fish it down to 175 feet in some areas. So you need the heavy jig to be able to feel the bottom. Lake trout like to orient towards the bottom. So it's important to know where you're at in the water column and target those fish. So.
Jigging was working well today, and as the morning went on, the action continued to pick up, boating fish after fish in hopes of finding a giant Lake Superior lake trout.
Two of them. Oh, 2 of them here. Hook ready? They're right underneath the boat.
It's been a pretty good day. We've had some really good numbers. The fish were really active earlier on. They slow down typically towards the middle of the day, which is kind of normal. They're going to slow down a little bit. But I think we've had a really good day as far as numbers go. We're still looking for that one big giant that we know's out here. We've seen quite a few of them swimming up below the boat. Just getting one of them to bite's the trick today.
Bent right over.
That's not a bad fish there, Brad.
Nope. It's a nice fish.
Nice fish.
Even though this wasn't the giant fish we were looking for, it was still a very nice fish, weighing around 15 pounds. Any fish of this caliber is a trophy, especially when you catch it 50 miles offshore with spinning tackle. After a few quick pictures, it was time to get this fish back in the water.
It's a very special place out there as far as the fish go. I take great pride in trying to protect that place as much as I can. On my boat, we try and release pretty much any fish that's going to be over about 15 pounds. We get a few good pictures. We get those fish back in the water as quick as we can. I think it's very important to keep as many of those fish out there as we can to keep the population out there. There's many areas on the reef that have good sized populations of smaller fish, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pound fish. Those are the great fish for eating. Those are the great fish for table fare. Those 15, 20 pound and up fish are great for pictures, and those are your spawning fish. And like I said, I think it's very, very important to get as many of those fish back in the water healthy as you can.
It's been great. We're still waiting for that big one. Any second, I think you have that opportunity when you're fishing out here. Catching lots of fish, good numbers, stacked in this area that we're fishing right now. It's fun. It's fun seeing everybody catching them. Hope it continues. I think it will.
Stannard Rock Light was actually built in the late 1800s, and then it was actually manned for about 60 years through the end of 1950 when they finally automated it. But it's considered the loneliest place in the Great Lakes, is what they call it. It's the furthest lighthouse from shore in the continental United States. And they used to operate, everything out there was done by steamships. So all the supplies and everything were brought out there by steamships. And there was guys that actually spent 6 to 8 week shifts out there on Stannard Rock operating the light. Everything was operated in kerosene back then. So all the kerosene was stored down in the bottom of the lighthouse. And there was usually a 3 to 4 man crew that spent up to 6 weeks on the light at a time before they were relieved. Late in the 1950s, there was a big explosion down in the basement of the lighthouse, which was the final straw. And after that, they decided to fully automate the lighthouse so they didn't have to man it anymore.
The Stannard Rock Lighthouse is a piece of Michigan history, and it also happens to mark what is likely the best spot in the state to catch trophy lake trout. John has been fishing Stannard Rock for nearly 2 decades, and although he does a variety of other trips around the area, there's no doubt that fishing the rock is the main draw for a visiting angler.
I've been going out to the Rock now for nearly 20 years. I've been fishing it really consistently now for about the last 15 years. I started actually running charter boats just right out of college for another guy after I got my captain's license, and I ran a number of boats out there for about 8 years, averaging usually about 15 to 20 trips a year. And I did that up and through about 5 years ago when we ended up starting Daybreak Charters. And for the last 5 years now, we've averaged between 25 and 35 runs a year out to Stannard Rock. So it's definitely a place, it's the big draw, it's a place that people come from all over the country. We get people from Florida and California and all different corners of the country to fish out at Stannard Rock.
We ended the day having landed over 75 Lakers, and although we were never able to land one of the giants that Stannard Rock is known for, it was still an exceptional day on the water. Special thanks to John and the rest of the crew for having me on board today and helping me cross off something that should be on every Michigander's bucket list.